Hey everyone. So today I'm going to get more into the text of the social contract. First, let's ask, what is the purpose of this text? What is Rousseau trying to accomplish here? What he's trying to accomplish is to find a philosophical foundation for legitimate sovereignty. So to find a kind of theoretical way of defending, supporting, justifying the use of sovereign force, the use of sovereign authority, the use of the authority to make laws, for example. What gives the government the right to tell you what to do, ultimately, is one of the questions at play here that he's trying to answer. And he ultimately comes to the conclusion that sovereignty can only be legitimate if it is popular sovereignty. Monarchical sovereignty, the sovereignty of a king, is not legitimate for Rousseau. It's only legitimate if it is truly an exercise of the will of the people, or the general will. Right. So in the first part of what you read in book one, Rousseau breaks down the difference between, as he sees it, the state of nature and civil society. And the social contract is really the transition between those two places, between those two realms. It's another question what exactly you think those realms are. In one sense, it seems like he's just describing historical development. It seems like he's describing the way that civilization came to be out of relative barbarism. The problem with that is that as I just said, he thinks that only democratic sovereignty is legitimate, or only popular sovereignty is legitimate. And, well, I mean, how much of civilization involves popular sovereignty? Looking around at the world that Rousseau himself lives in, almost nobody lives under anything but a king or a queen. Right, so in that sense, it seems contradictory to say this is a kind of account of how civilization developed. This is an account of history. On the other hand, it could be seen as just a kind of philosophical model for for principles for implementing a good society, principles for implementing the kind of popular sovereignty that Rousseau wants to see in the world. And of course, people did go and take these ideas and implement them in the real world. So that's a basic ambiguity, kind of methodological ambiguity that I see operating here. Rousseau is full of problems. He's full of contradictions, and we'll at some point get into what some of those problems and contradictions are, especially the notion of the general will, as has come up a little bit on the discussion board already, presents a lot of internal difficulties of interpretation. So this is a tricky text. We're reading it because it's really historically important. We're reading it because, in fact, I think a lot of the contradictions expressed in Rousseau's theories are the contradictions of liberalism itself. In many cases, the source of the failures of liberalism, the failures of it to, or its reasons for its succumbing to other kinds of political forces. If you look throughout history, or ways in which liberal societies can become corrupt, I think looking at the contradictions within Rousseau's theory can in many ways point us to being more sensitive about those sort of cracks in the successful operation of a government based on popular sovereignty. So the basic concepts of the text itself, I think, are, at least in the first part, excluding the general will, are the state of nature, social contract, and civil society. And I place them in that order, not with the social contract coming first, because there's a progression operating here. Right? The social contract is what moves us from the state of nature into civil society. So what is the difference here? Rousseau elaborates a whole list of things that separate civil society from the state of nature. I want to focus on one that I think kind of organizes the others, and that's the notions of natural and civil liberty. Or civil freedom, if you want to think of it that way. So Rousseau says that in the state of nature we have what he calls natural liberty. In the state of civil society we have what he calls civil liberty. What are the differences between these things? Natural liberty really is just the freedom to do whatever you can. I say whatever you can, not whatever you want, because in reality, you can imagine how this plays out, right? Some are strong, some are weak, some are born into favorable positions, some aren't, and classes sort of separate along those lines, right? Some are allowed to get whatever they want and do whatever they want. Everybody else, which presumably is the majority, it seems like that's usually the case, gets to just suffer whatever those who are powerful want them to do. Right. So that's and I think Rousseau agrees with that characterization as well. He's obviously negative about what the state of nature is. Somebody who has more like libertarian leanings might try to make a defense of the state of nature. Maybe Rousseau is not, characterizing it as charitably as he could. Maybe there's something to be said for the kind of freedom that operates there. But I'll leave the judgment on that up to you. This is about what Rousseau thinks at the moment. So that's the state of nature from which the social contract essentially saves us or extricates us. In civil society, we have a different kind of freedom. We have civil liberty. And civil liberty is, Rousseau thinks, really a higher form of liberty. So it involves restrictions, it involves sacrifices that we have to make. Really, at its most concrete, if you're trying to get your head around what exactly the social contract is, what do we mean when we're talking about it, at the most concrete, it just means your agreement to follow the laws. Right? That's the contract itself, is the contract between you and the government to follow the laws, with the agreement that if you don't, the government has the right to do bad things to you. Right? That's the social contract at its most basic. But so civil society, civil liberty requires this kind of subjection to law. So it's a form of liberty that requires sacrifice. And as Rousseau presents it, that sacrifice ends up gaining us way more advantages than what we've really lost. Right. So all the advantages of civilization, of the exercise of reason, the pursuit of things that are higher than just kind of base animal instincts. All of these things are made possible by the subjection to law. Again, let me go back to the sort of ambiguity that I raised earlier. Is this an account of history, or is this an account of the future, a hoped for future? Well, on the one hand, this story about the subjection to law and the advances of civilization that are possible by respect of it, that sounds like an account of history. That sounds like an account of, lots of things have been accomplished by civilization by the time that Rousseau is writing, and it didn't require democracy to get them done. So that's just one point, kind of in the favor of viewing this as a sort of view of history. And again, I'm not ultimately saying that it has to be one or the other. I want to leave this interpretation up to your thinking. But so that's the social contract separates the realm of the state of nature from the realm of civil society, and it does so by requiring our subjection to sets of laws, our subjection to laws that govern society and that preserve us from violence, ultimately, that preserve us from this state in which the only law is force, the only law is that of the stronger. I will leave it there for now, and I'll be in touch soon. I know you're all working on your papers, so good luck with those. Thanks.